Hello and welcome to Times Radio Frontline Recap with me, Philip Ingram. Now, I currently present Times Radio Frontline, but I'm also a commentator on all different channels on all matters geopolitics, defense, security, cyber, terrorism, and anything else that people cross my palms to talk about. Because genetically, and I can't say this being an Irishman, I've got an opinion about just about everything. But hey, we've got some fantastic things for you to have a look at this week. As ever, I urge you to go onto our channel, have a look at all of the interviews in their long form, because it's the long form version that will give you that real understanding of what's going on. And there are too many of the mainstream news channels out there just putting out sound bites and headlines. And I'm going to point you at a couple of sound bites today, but they're from our long form interviews. Go and listen to all of them because they give you real insights, and we get the right level of experts in for you to get that proper understanding of what is going on. And I know that's what you like. But first of all, let's set the scene. And the first bit of the scene we'll set is from Vladimir Putin giving his sort of annual State of the Nation address to the Russian people, and this time in front of lots of the press. Here we go here.
Поэтому она ведет себя не так, как
At preliminary meetings in Moscow before the Anchorage summit, proposals were made to us and we were asked to make certain compromises. When I arrived in Anchorage, I said that these would not be easy decisions for us, and we agreed to the compromises being proposed.
Это будут непростые решения. Но мы с предлагаемыми нам компромиссами согласны. И нереализации договоренности Минских соглашений, поэтому говорить о том, что мы что-то отвергаем, совершенно...
It's entirely incorrect and unfounded to claim that we reject anything. The ball is entirely in the court of our Western opponents, primarily the leaders of the Kiev regime, and in this case, the first and foremost, their European sponsors. We are ready for both negotiations and a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
В данном случае, прежде всего, европейских спонсоров. Мы готовы и к переговорам, и к завершению конфликта мирными средствами. Мы не считаем себя ответственными за гибель людей.
We do not consider ourselves responsible for the loss of life because it was not us who started this war. The war began after the coup d'etat in Ukraine and the unconstitutional armed takeover in 2014, as well as after the Kiev regime started fighting against its own citizens in the southeast of Ukraine.
And in this, Putin is talking about the fact that he hasn't rejected anything when it comes to peace deals with Ukraine and all the rest of it, and says that the ball is entirely in the court of our Western opponents, he says, primarily the leaders of the Kiev regime. And he says it's in their case first and foremost, but also with their European sponsors. It's interesting he's using the word sponsors when he talks about Kyiv as well. And he says that we are ready for both negotiations and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. It's just as well Pinocchio isn't a real person, otherwise we'd see Putin's nose growing. He goes on to say, we do not consider ourselves responsible for the loss of life because it was not us who started this war. Well, he's only convinced one person in the world it wasn't him that started this war. That seems to be Donald Trump. And he says the war began after a coup d'etat in Ukraine and the unconstitutional armed takeover in 2014, as well as after the Kyiv regime started fighting against its own citizen in the southeast of Ukraine. Well, I think Vladimir Putin is doing what the Russians do very well and using maskirovka or masking to throw out his view as to what he thinks is happening. The rest of us know that it's not true. We just have to convince Donald Trump not to listen to Putin, but to listen to the rest of us. The next little clip I want to point you at is discussing a loan from the European Union to Ukraine. Have a look at that. Have a look at this here.
Yes, good evening or good morning, I should better say. We all share one clear goal: a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. That was the motto of the discussion today. So we gathered with a clear objective: to address Ukraine's pressing financing needs for the next 2 years. And I'm very pleased to say we made it. We have secured an agreement that we can deliver on the financing needs for Ukraine for the next 2 years.
Thanks. Good morning, Mark Peperkorn, Volkskrant.
As you know, the Commission had proposed two solutions, both legally sound, both technically feasible. On one hand, we proposed EU borrowing on the market, and on the other hand, we had developed the reparations loan. Very important was in our discussion that last week already on Friday, we had sent a very clear and strong political message by immobilizing the Russian assets in the European Union over the long term. So that message was very clear. And building on that, we today had then agreed to find a solution for the financing of Ukraine in the next 2 years.
26 anymore on Ukraine. So one country less.
The member states have agreed to finance the Ukraine through EU borrowing on the capital markets for an amount of 90 billion euros for the next 2 years. We will do this by way of enhanced cooperation that is backed by the EU budget headroom and based on an unanimous agreement to amend the MFF. Similarly to the reparations loan, very important here, Ukraine would only need to pay back the loan once it receives reparations. This is the solution we found together, and as discussed in the last weeks, financing Ukraine beyond 2027 will then be part of the next MFF discussion.
Now, this is where von der Leyen, speaking on behalf of the EU, was talking about achieving a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. The objective of the discussion was to address Ukraine's pressing financial needs for the next 2 years. And she went on to say that she was pleased an agreement had been secured to deliver on these needs. Now, this 90 billion euros is not from the $300 billion that the Russians have had frozen in European financial institutions. This is a loan from the EU, but the loan is, from what I understand, predicated on Russia then paying reparations to Ukraine, and only when that happens will Ukraine be mandated to pay the loan back to the EU. Whether those reparations come from Russia just giving Ukraine cash, unlikely that that'll ever happen, or from the $300 billion that is currently frozen in European financial institutions being unfrozen and elements of that being used, is not clear at this moment in time. And I don't think the EU is clear on it. Interestingly, the debate about that $300 billion of frozen assets is something that I'll be talking about with Bill Browder at some stage in the next few days. And I think Bill Browder will turn around and say that part of the problem there is that senior leaders in the European institutions and in the Belgian financial institutions have been physically threatened by the Russians and are under fear of their lives if that money is released. That shows the level of pressure that the Kremlin is putting on things. And then the next little snippet I want you to have a look at, setting the scene for what's been going on this week, is Donald Trump speaking in the White House.
Had a very good conversation 1 hour ago with the European leaders, many of them involving the war with Russia and Ukraine. We had a long discussion, and things are seemingly going well, but we've been saying that for a long time, and it's a difficult one. There's some killing going on that shouldn't have happened, and we appreciate them working. The security protocols yesterday were amazing, and they have been amazing, having to do with Russia and Ukraine. And I had a long talk with President Zelensky. Also, I spoke with the heads of Germany, Italy, NATO, Finland, France, the United Kingdom, Poland, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. We had very long and very good talks. And again, I think things are going along pretty well. Nobody's seen anything like it, actually, since World War II. But and I think we're closer now, and they will tell you that they're closer now. We had numerous conversations with President Putin of Russia, and I think we're closer now than we have been ever. And we'll see what we can do. We want to save a lot of lives. We sell equipment to NATO. We don't spend any money, but we do want to see if we can save a lot of lives. And at this moment, Russia wants to get it. And the problem is but we're getting closer. We're having tremendous support from European leaders. They want to get it ended also. And at this moment, Russia wants to get it ended. The problem is they'll want to get it ended, and then all of a sudden they won't. And Ukraine will want to get it ended, and all of a sudden they won't. So we have to get them on the same page. But I think that's working along. Very good talk. So we have to get them on the same page. But I think that's working along. Very good talk. I want to see it end. They want to see it end. I actually think that President Putin wants to see it end. You know, I've had good talks. We've had good talks with Russia. And I think they'd like to get back to a more normal way of life. And he was afraid to do anything. But he puts Tina in jail for 9 years because she caught people cheating. In terms of security guarantee, we're working with Europe on it. Europe would be a big part of that. And we're working on the security guarantee so the war doesn't start up again. We don't want to have a war start up again. You know, as I said, she was cheating. She wasn't cheating. She caught people cheating on the election, 2020.
Have you recently spoken directly to Putin?
Yeah, I have.
And this is Donald Trump going on about obviously the war involving Russia and Ukraine and his discussions with European leaders. And he highlights that the European leaders include the heads of Germany, Italy, NATO, Finland, France, the UK, Poland, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And he says things are seemingly going well. But then he also acknowledged that he's been saying that for a long time and says he's had a long talk with President Zelensky and numerous conversations with Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, with the most recent one and confirming his most recent one. He says he believes that he's closer now than we've ever been to end the conflict. Well, I don't see how he can get closer than saying he would end it within 24 hours of him being inaugurated. He's failed to achieve that. I think Donald Trump is being overly optimistic in what is going on. He indicated the whole thing is about saving lives, but I noted that the US is still selling equipment to NATO, and therefore all of his actions are not costing the United States any money whatsoever. In fact, they're making money out of it. It's a typical Donald Trump rambling conversation where he comes in, he talks about security protocols, killing going on that shouldn't have happened, the conflicts unlike anything that we've seen since the Second World War, plans to work with Europe on a security guarantee and prevent the war from starting up again. We have to question what sort of guarantee that Donald Trump signs is something that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people can actually rely on, and goes on about a number of other different things in a typical Trump way. But it sets the scene for what is happening at the moment. And other things that are happening, the next video is quite an audacious attack, and this is something that the Ukrainians are doing increasingly. And this is an attack by Ukrainian drones on the motor vessel Quendel in the Mediterranean. Let's bring the video up here. And what have we got here? We've got a drone using a thermal camera at a civilian ship. And I understand the MV Quendel is registered in the Middle East. I think it's UAE registered, but the detail hasn't come out as to who actually owns it. It was part of Russia's shadow fleet. And apparently it had senior members of Russian GRU, the first directorate, their military intelligence on board. And this is the organization that is coordinating the movement of shadow fleet vessels around the world. And this is a heavy Ukrainian drone that's dropping explosive devices on the ship. And apparently the ship catches fire and is burning fiercely in the Mediterranean almost as we speak. But there are unconfirmed reports that the head of the GRU, and this is very significant, has been killed in this attack. We wait for that to be confirmed by the Russians or confirmed by the Ukrainians. And what we can see is it's more than one drone. There's the heavy drone dropping the explosives, but there's another drone sitting off, taking pictures from further afar. Another very audacious attack. And I'd say this is probably in the same realms of Operation Spider's Web, that audacious Ukrainian drone attack using drones flying from the top of trucks to attack strategic bomber airfields across Russia. More details coming out in this in the next hours or days, but another fantastic attack by the Ukrainians. Now, I've got two interviews I want to point you out this week, very briefly. The first one is from John Foreman, and have a look at this here.
Really like to get your understanding of what exactly happened with this Russian submarine in Russia's Novorossiysk naval base that Ukraine claims to have sunk with unmanned water vehicles. What do you think the reality is here?
Well, of course, the Russians denied the submarine's been damaged, but they denied everything. They denied Ukraine sank the Moskva 3 years ago. So they lie about everything. But I think, for me, there's two or three deductions. I mean, firstly, the Russian fleet is now based in Novorossiysk, not based in Sevastopol. In Crimea, the Russian fleet had to abandon Sevastopol and retreat to the east, and that first opened up, obviously, Ukraine to be able to use the western side of the Black Sea. And then the second thing I'd say is allowing a drone into your now major naval base is a massive breach of failure of security again. And I think it shows complacency and competence by the Russian Navy and the Russian fleet. And thirdly, I think I'd say it shows the sort of growth in the technologies of drones in the air, on the water, underwater. I mean, the Ukrainian Navy, with assistance, has come a very long way in being able to target the Russian ships, submarines in the Black Sea, and now she's getting something with a heavy charge into the main anchorage is again shows where that's got to, and I think we can probably learn quite a lot of lessons from that.
And how much do you think Ukraine's maritime capabilities have developed over this year, particularly using Sea Baby drones and AI in the Black Sea? But more recently, they're also starting to target oil platforms in the Caspian Sea.
Well, so war was the mother of invention, and Ukrainians have showed themselves to be pretty inventive. People say that they managed to target the Russian Black Sea fleet without having their own navy. I mean, I think they've adopted a sea denial strategy. They can't control the Black Sea themselves, but they can deny use of the Black Sea to the Russians. And I think I saw Ukrainian generals say that the cycle of technological advance inside the Ukrainian armed forces generally and at sea is like every 6 months, sort of generational change, which shows how quickly things are evolving. I think we've seen, autonomy, how the drones have gone from being controlled by a person on a controller via satellite link through to being autonomous. That was on the surface. Now, if the Ukrainians have cracked how to do autonomous underwater vehicles going to harbours, then that's another step forward in their development. But I see this constant cat and mouse. The Russians have sort of respond with this, and therefore the Ukrainians do that. And for the Ukrainians, keeping the Russians pinned into their naval base and attacking them where they think they're safe, obviously strikes fear into the hearts of the Russian sailors and prevents them operating more widely.
Now, John is discussing yet another audacious Ukrainian attack, and this is the Ukrainian SBU attacking with a remote submarine. That's a Sea Baby drone attacking a Russian Kilo-class submarine in the Novorossiysk Russian naval base. Now, Novorossiysk naval base is one where Russia evacuated its Black Sea fleet to whenever they were forced out of Sevastopol in Crimea. And they thought that they were safe in there. To get a drone submarine into the harbour, past all of the defences and past a number of other capital ships to attack a docked Kilo-class submarine is very audacious and shocking at the lack of security. And John goes on to talk about the lack of security that the Russians have got around their port. The Russians, of course, have said that the submarine wasn't damaged in any way, shape or form. Satellite photography is suggesting that there are oil leaks and other leaks from the back of the ship where the explosion has happened. But John goes into a lot of detail about the impact of this from a psychological blow against the Russians, and also highlighting the real concern that there will be amongst the remnants of the Black Sea fleet, with Ukraine having sunk at least a third of it and damaged at least 50% of it. And since that interview, I have seen satellite pictures where the Russians have sunk some barges in the entrance to the Novorossiysk harbour, and those barges will stop anything getting in, but they also stop anything getting out. So effectively, the Ukrainians have rendered the Russian Black Sea fleet inoperable, confining it to a harbour. drones may be attacking into that harbour, or other ballistic missiles attacking into that harbour. That's a silly move by the Russians. And the final interview I want to point you out this week, of the clips that we're going to show, is with Diane Francis, who's always an old friend of the show. Have a look at this here.
Putin is defiant. He's unusually defiant. In his statement on December 17th, he was insulting. He called the Europeans swine. He thought they were disgusting. He didn't go after Trump, of course. And there were all kinds of things that he said that were extremely defiant, because he thinks he's got all the cards, to use Trump's metaphor. He thinks he's got the cards, and he doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. And he actually thinks he's winning. And, he's not winning the war, but he's not losing it. So this is the problem.
Really interested to get your perspective on this very frank interview in Vanity Fair by the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, who says that Donald Trump understands the harsh reality underpinning the stalling of these talks. Putin wants the whole of Ukraine. So why would he publicly say, Donald Trump, that Putin wants peace?
I don't pretend to know the inside of that man's mind. All I know is that I wrote a piece, and I think, cracked the algorithm, if you like, that's going on here. And, Lenin famously said that the capitalists will sell us the rope that we will hang them with. And that is exactly what Putin's been doing to Trump. He's been enticing him with business deals, with riches, all kinds of things dangled in front of him to take his eye off the ball about negotiations and ending the war, and forcing him to stop shooting people. And so it's a very clever thing. And Trump, of course, greedy capitalist that he is, has fallen for it hook, line, and sinker, and so have his donors, and so have American corporations. This has dragged the process unnecessarily, and it is not the solution, because Putin is gaining all kinds of points as a result of this, and he is hanging in there, and he's preventing it. It's only up to Putin whether this war continues or not.
I'm really interested also to hear if you have a theory on the inside working of US politics on all of this, because I've been listening to some of the analysis, and it says that underlying these negotiations are vying US camps influencing negotiations. So you've got the Witkoff-Kushner camp, you've got the Rubio camp, and the J.D. Vance camp. Do you see it that way, and can you explain what's going on?
Well, the J.D. Vance camp is pretty isolationist, and it has no time for Ukraine. He was the one that led the ambush in the Oval Office with Trump of Zelensky. And he's discredited anything to do with Ukraine's victimhood or its cause for democracy and that sort of thing. Rubio is an old-fashioned American internationalist. In other words, he believes in diplomacy, he believes in the post-war institutions, he goes about things in a traditional way, he's reasonable, and that sort of thing. And then you've got, Trump, and you've got Witkoff whispering in his ear that, tons of money can be made. The Russians will do business with us. The best way to end the war is to make them partners with us, and they won't fight anymore. And, that's not the game. What they don't understand is what Lenin said. Putin is appealing to the greed of capitalism to go for profits and forget national security and morality. What about morality? There's no morality in the Trump position. One day he's with him, one day he's not. And, he could bring all kinds of leverage and pressure to bear on Putin. And apparently he's considering it now, but, who knows whether that's the case. So yes, like all leaders, he's got courtiers that are all fighting and arguing for position and prominence inside his cabal, and that's how it breaks out. And then on top of that, you kind of have an isolationism in America.
It's been pointed out to me that what Donald Trump is now aiming for is a date to get some kind of path towards peace, or whatever you want to call it, before the anniversary of his inauguration, and that's what he's got his eyes on. Now, assuming that it's all off for the moment, because the Russians have, as predicted, said no. the question will be, how does Donald Trump actually react by about mid-January?
I'm kind of interested as to whether he's going to react before Christmas, because I think this would have been his big goal. Let's tie this up with a bow and put it under everybody's Christmas tree. I did it. And then get the Pulitzer Prize in January. I mean, for peace. I don't know what he's going to do. He's very erratic. And I think he's got to be very upset that all this effort has been done by the Americans and the Europeans and the Ukrainians to come up with something that's reasonable, that's also compromising. For instance, Zelensky said, we don't have to join NATO. That's a big giveaway. And so there's been some success on that side of softening the alliance. But for Trump to just turn around, insult them, and just say out of hand, no, I want all of Donbass. And by the way, I'm going to conquer it unless you give it to me.
What about these platinum security guarantees that are now being offered by the US, especially in light of the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, which everybody quotes when you talk about whether or not you can actually rely on security offers?
Yeah, it's got to be a European and an American security guarantee regime. It's got to be both. It can't be one or the other, because just putting down nice words and promises on paper doesn't work when push comes to shove. And that's what happened in Budapest in 1994. And so the whole thing, and Britain and the United States had signed on to protecting Ukraine in the event of it being invaded again. It was invaded in 2022. They didn't send in one troop. They didn't send in anything. Now, they've been very helpful, don't get me wrong. But this time around, the Ukrainians are smarter. So they are angling for boots on the ground, European boots on the ground or mercenaries, and American watchfulness and intelligence and surveillance. That's what they want.
Now, Diane is talking about the peace deal, and we've gone from the 28-point to the 24-point plan to the 20-point plan to the Berlin Agreement, and we haven't seen the details that have come out of there. And she very eloquently discusses how Donald Trump keeps bumping this plan backwards and forwards, and there's no real detail coming out, and emphasizes the fact that it's unlikely that there's going to be anything that will be put to the Russians that Vladimir Putin can agree to. But what she does emphasize in this is really quite interesting. It's the differences within the US camp itself, and the real differences there are between the opinions of J.D. Vance, the vice president, Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's special envoy to Russia, and his golfing partner and property lawyer, and Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. And Marco Rubio, of course, is responsible for all US foreign policy. And if you're not getting those three coming together and you're getting disagreements amongst them, that means the advice that's going into Donald Trump is not coherent. And therefore, what's coming out of Donald Trump will not be coherent if it ever was coherent. But we have to see. And then Diane makes another very interesting comment about our recent Putin statement, where he calls the Europeans pigs. And in that very statement, Putin goes on to talk about and says that he wishes to retake his historical lands by force or diplomacy. Now, it doesn't define historical lands, but from Putin's perspective, Putin is an old KGB man. He's an old Soviet man. His historical lands, we know, are the old Soviet Union. He's not just stopping in Ukraine. He's made a very clear statement here that taking the Donbass is not his objective. Taking the whole of Ukraine is not his objective. Taking back the old Soviet Union is his objective, and we should be very concerned about that. He's not going to do it through diplomacy. He will try and do it through force, and he thinks in multi-generational terms, and that's something that we need to be cognizant of. So those are the two interviews that we've highlighted this week. All of them are good. Go and watch all of them, please. And watch the long-form versions of these, not just the snippets that we've published here. But thank you for watching. This is Frontline. I'm Philip Ingram, and I hope you have a really good day and good week. Goodbye.